everybody. This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about when and how did the Blessed Sacrament leave the sanctuary, move to a closet. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancta, secutor in principio, et nunc et semper, et secula in seculorum. Amen. So prior to Vatican II, it was very customary for centuries to have the tabernacle behind the altar or adjacent to the altar, or part of the high altar, because back then, before the Novus Ordo rolled out, the altar was essentially on the wall with a retablo or a high altar around it. So you would have the tabernacle, or the priest would have the tabernacle right in front of them, and the altar right here, and they were facing Ad Orientem, the crowd was behind them. So of course that changed with the Novus Ordo Mass that was rolled out in 1970. And so when did the tabernacle get moved out? And what really happened was, again, in spirit of Vatican II, there were some liturgists and some priests that thought it was smart to do this. And so the church gave some concessions for churches that had a lot of pilgrims, churches that had a lot of tourists. So you think of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. You think of maybe the 4 major churches in Rome. You think of just Notre Dame. So, and I'm not saying that the tabernacles are necessarily moved out of these churches, but what I'm saying is that they gave an exclusion to certain churches to be like, since we have so much tourists, and many of these tourists are not religious, and it would make it harder for people who want to do adoration to be around all these tourists walking around. And if any of you have been to the major churches in Europe, you know what this is like. So like, okay, let's build an adjacent structure that's beautiful that we'll put the tabernacle, and so people can adore over there. And so you go to St. Patrick's in New York, they have that. So it was for these minor exceptions, churches, cathedrals that have a lot of pilgrims, that they allowed this. But give an inch, take a foot, and then you have the liturgists come in. And we talked about it in the great Michael Rose book, Ugly as Sin. I recommend you check out this book. And it talks about what happened after Vatican II. Why did churches go from being essentially the basilica style that we've had since Constantine to the multi-purpose, ugly, almost looks like a Freemasonic temple from the outside churches that you can't even tell are Catholic. And he documents why this is. And one of course, is the change agent liturgists that were in the church, and also how a lot of dioceses were hiring Protestant architects to make the churches look more Protestant, more multifunctional. So you see a lot of suburban churches who just don't even have a tabernacle in the sanctuary, and they've moved it to a closet. I always call it a closet, but literally I've been to churches, and I live in South Central Texas, where it's in a room that's smaller than the room I'm in now. It's literally a closet, and of course no one's in there adoring it. Not to mention, many times they use that very modern kind of ugly architecture around, like the structure that's housing the tabernacle, or the monstrance that might be attached to the tabernacle. And so a lot of churches started to do this. This became the fad. And in fact, in the 80s and 90s, you'd be hard pressed to go into a suburban church and actually see the tabernacle in there. And so you would find them in sometimes very beautiful chapels. To credit, I've been to churches that don't have the tabernacle in the sanctuary, and they have it in a nice, beautiful chapel that's longitudinal. So when you're adoring, you're not actually looking at other people. Can't stand those because you can't really focus, right? So what happened was it was during Benedict that they revised the Code of Canon Law when it came to this, and it was reminded to people that the sanctuary should be put in the tabernacle. It needs to be, and it says, in an essential place of focus, which historically is going to be in the behind the altar. I do have a video here on liturgical abuses that drive me crazy. I think it's a 7-part series, but I recorded one at the cathedral in Chicago. And if you go to the cathedral in Chicago, that's Cardinal Subich's church. It's got a really weird crucifix. You can't even call it a crucifix. And then it's got the tabernacle to the left of the altar, and it's got this weird art modern design. I'll see if I can put a picture of it. But when you see churches being built now, the majority of churches that are being built now, and you've seen a lot of churches in the last 10 years where we've had now younger priests come in and be like, no, we need to move it back. So kudos to those places that have moved it back. And I think this is where it needs to be. This is where it's been historically, and by the revision in canon law, it says that it needs to be there. So if you belong to a parish where the priest still has it in another room, I would kindly bring it up and be like, we really should put it here. Everybody wants it in the church. Everybody wants it in the church. And I mean, and what can you do? Like if you already built a chapel and you're like, okay, well, this is our adoration chapel. There is a way where you can bring the tabernacle back, and you can have a smaller tabernacle in the chapel, or you can have the tabernacle back in the sanctuary and have a monstrance that can be attached to where the tabernacle be. I mean, there's ways you can do it, or if anything, you can just change that room into something else. It's possible, but the tabernacle needs to be in the sanctuary. So when they gave this exception, it was supposed to be just for major pilgrimage churches, and then you see the liturgists take it over. Now they put it everywhere, but you do see a trend of it coming back, and I think that's where it should be, and I think that most of you guys would agree as well. Post in the comments, guys. I would like to hear from you. The parish you grew up in, did it have the tabernacle in the sanctuary? Did it have it in a closet? I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.